I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Okay, today I want to talk about investment properties, buying an investment property, the difference between income on that property and having cash flow on the property. Because it's a reoccurring theme I see in my blog, but that I see in dozens of investment websites on real estate. I continue to see people that really obsess over buying a property that is cash flow positive. That's all they're interested in. They want that property to be cash flow positive, meaning that they've got, after all their expenses, they still have excess income coming in. Of course, it's going to be taxed at your full marginal tax rate, but that's their goal, to have cash flow on the property. And I've done many blogs on this in the past. I also talk about it in great detail in my book. If you bought my book, you'll know about the chapter I have in here called The Ghost Ship to Wealth. And in here, I break down the numbers specifically for Vancouver. I talk about a condo that I represented the buyer on many years ago in the downtown east side. He bought it, put 20% down, put a tenant in it, still owns it today, in what I call the ghost ship to wealth. In other words, the tough part was getting the 20% down payment. Once he did that, he put a tenant in it, and then you kind of just set it out to sea. Let the ghost ship sail and let the trade winds carry it, is the analogy that I use. And you shouldn't be all that concerned with cash flow. Now, in this particular case that I talk about in my book, like most properties in Vancouver, whether that's a detached house in Renfrew with a couple of rental suites or a laneway or a studio unit in the West End, they're probably not going to be cash flow positive. You will have income on the property, meaning that after your deductions, your property taxes, maybe your maintenance fees, your interest on the mortgage, you will have a bit of income on the property, maybe $2,000 or $3,000, let's say. So not a lot, which is good because remember, that's added to your working income and taxed at your full marginal rate. The cash flow positive people, they want that another step above that. They want all your costs to be covered, including your principal payment, and still have some excess cash left over. Now, cash flow can be great depending on your tax situation, because again, as I say, cash flow positive on property is going to be added to your other income, taxed at your full marginal rate. But what I find is that cash flow properties at cash flow, they're not going to be in Vancouver. They're not going to be, chances are, in the lower mainland. They're not going to be in cities like Los Angeles or San Diego or San Francisco or Portland or Seattle or Manhattan. They tend to be in the second, third tier, smaller cities, rural areas, especially in the United States. Think Boise, Idaho, or Corpus Christi, Texas, or Wyoming, or a lot of smaller cities, Cleveland, Akron, Ohio. Some of the ones that I see that come through my desk here are opportunities in places like Edmonton, Alberta, or Regina, or they could be university campuses, towns, where they've got condos that you can buy for $165K and they will cash flow positive. Problem is, though, of course, in the summertime on those college towns, it's usually empty for a couple of months, but during the school season, you can get a good rent and it'll cash flow positive. Now, these can be great, but what I find is if you dig a little deeper on these cash flow properties, I saw some that were recently sent to me out in the Okanagan. It sounds great, but if you dig a little deeper, you will find that you generally do not get a whole lot of appreciation on these properties over time. You get some, absolutely, you'll get some capital gain, but nowhere near what I find the capital gain that you can get in Vancouver, East Side, West Side, downtown, Mount Pleasant, or even Burnaby or Richmond or New Westminster. And that's the thing that a lot of people miss. They're obsessed with the cash flow, when my rule of thumb and how I've always done it, and what I've found over time with a lot of my successful investor clients, ones that had already had a large portfolio of real estate before I became their realtor, you find out that most of them are kind of like me, and how I learned through my dad and through my father is that don't solely focus on cash flow. As a matter of fact, it's secondary. Focus on wealth creation, and that is done through capital gains. Capital gains and appreciation is where the magic happens for a number of reasons. First off, it's sheltered. You don't have to pay the tax man until you sell the property, so it's compounding growth, tax-free. Of course, capital gains is taxed at half the rate of your working income or cash flow. You know, the other thing about investing in Vancouver on properties that don't necessarily cash flow is, I've talked about it many times, is the abundance of high quality tenants, the ease to rent to these high qualified tenants that are earning 60, 70, 80, 100K a year. Again, you've got the long-term capital gain on it. So in my book, I spell all this out, the difference between cash flow and long-term capital gain. Long-term capital gain is what you want to focus on. The other thing, of course, is using that leverage. Now, so many people, when you mention the term leverage and taking on debt and taking on a mortgage, boy, watch out. It can open up a hornet's nest. Look no further than some of the dust-ups I've had over the years on Twitter from these people that as soon as you talk about taking on leverage, borrowing to buy an appreciating asset, which is what you're doing with real estate, they confuse that with credit cards at 20 and 25%, or student loans, or Canadian Tire credit card balances, or furniture loans. And they are night and day. I've done so many blogs on the difference between good debt and bad debt. And I have always advocated on here, use leverage to your advantage. It's the only way you are going to create any type of wealth, but use it conservatively. Don't over leverage, although with the Canadian banks, you cannot over leverage here. Anyone that tells you you can, of course, does not have, I always say, doesn't have two dimes to rub together. They have never bought a home. They have never gone through the gauntlet that is qualifying for a mortgage in Canada. When you buy an investment property, or pretty much if you're buying a principal residence in Vancouver, you have to use a conventional mortgage, 20% down. It's mandatory to buy an investment property. You want to put as less down as you can, 20% hopefully, but in some cases I've got clients now where the bank is making them put down 25 or 30. It all depends on your financial wherewithal here. But the go ship to wealth, this isn't a get rich quick thing. It's about putting 20% down, borrowing the other 80% at 1.8 or 2% interest rates, putting a good tenant in there that's renting that unit for $2,100 or $2,200 a month, or if it's a detached house out in Renfrew, you've got a couple of basement suites and maybe a laneway house, collecting those rent checks and just setting it out to sea. You will have some income on the property. You're not going to have cash flow, but that's not what's important right now. The important thing is using the leverage. It's not a get rich quick. Keep it for 10 or 15 or 20 years until the tenant is paid off that home. What you will find too is that after about 10 years, all things being equal, we'll say, and interest rates stay the same, after about 10 years, you probably will start to see a little bit of cash flow because, of course, as the mortgage goes on, you're paying less towards interest and more towards principal. So it starts to shift after about 10 or 12 years. But want to set the record straight on why cash flow is not where it's all at. I see people coming to me all the time with properties in Kelowna or Edmonton, or I saw one recently, a project in Regina, that, yeah, they look pretty good on paper. You can buy these units for $165K and apparently you can get $1,200 a month rent for them and they will cash flow with 20 or 25% down. But if you dig a little deeper, generally you don't get a lot of appreciation on these. And for a guy like me and for most of my savvy investor clients, the higher net worth clients that I represent, it's more about capital gains. That is far more favorable, using the leverage and doing what I call the go ship to wealth. My book will explain it in a lot more detail here. I know for those of you who have read the book, it was a bit of an eye-opener for you on how cash flow, income, and how using leverage works. You know, the other thing too, just finish it off here, with some of these cash flow properties, keep in mind that they are generally in second and third tier cities, smaller cities, rural areas. And when you get into those, remember that you cannot manage these properties on your own. You're going to have to hire a professional property manager now. And property managers are not cheap. You know, I've got several fantastic property managers that I can refer you to, because I do work with a lot of my clients live in the Lower Mainland, and 99% of my clients who live in the Lower Mainland that buy an investment property manage it themselves, which is the way to go. I will teach you, give you everything you need to know about getting a tenant, running a credit check. I have a full package that my wife will send, and we'll go through it all with you. And that is the way to go. But I do have a lot of clients that are in Alberta, Manitoba, the United States, Toronto, China, India, that many of them are expats. They used to live in Vancouver and they bought an investment property to get a foothold in Vancouver. Because a lot of the times the goal is they'll buy it, rent it out for now, and then move into it eventually, and or use it as a base for when they do move back into the city while they're trying to buy another place. So in that situation, they have to hire a property manager. But property managers are going to charge you anywhere from 8 to 12% every month to manage the home. And then they're going to charge you 50% of the first month's rent to get a tenant. So it's not cheap. So when you're buying these cash flow properties, you're generally going to have to hire a property manager. So make sure that you filter that in. And I can tell you, I've got the best property managers there are that I'll refer you to and get you a special rate. But they are not going to do as good of a job as you can. You know, something that my father and all my mentors taught me when I was moving up the ladder here, when I was first buying my first properties 34 years ago, was that my dad's philosophy was only own properties that are within a 40 minute drive of where you live. And that's what I've always stuck with. It's funny because I find a lot of my investors that I've worked through the years with, who I've come on, you know, just lately with, many of them have bought these homes decades ago. They were the same way. They were buying detached homes in East Vancouver and managing themselves, because things will go wrong. You've got to get a new tenant. You've got to fix the dishwasher. Things happen. You want to be, in my opinion, within driving distance. Nothing wrong with hiring a property manager if you live out of the city. But if you can, you want to be managing your own properties, not to mention all the savings you're going to have not having to pay that property manager. And they're not, no matter how good they are, you know, you managing your own properties will be a far superior way to go. And I've often said here too, it is not as difficult as people think. The first one is the toughest one. But once you learn the ropes with all the documents, how to run the credit check, how to run your ads on Craigslist, I give you all of that. I give you a full rental package that's taken me probably 10 years to develop. Simple. All my clients at the end of the day say, this was a lot easier than I thought. The next time around is even easier when you got to get your next tenant. So keep that in mind. I continue to see people, you know, they rave about cash flow. For me, I'm not all that interested in cash flow. I want to have properties that I can manage myself in the city or in the surrounding areas. I've got stuff in Vancouver, East Side, downtown, and Richmond. And many of my clients have got stuff all over the Lower Mainland that's within a 30 or 40 minute drive, so I don't have to pay a property manager. I'm also more interested in using the leverage, putting the 20% down, borrowing the rest at 2%, and doing what I call the ghost ship to wealth, which I spell out the hard numbers here. I give you guys in this book, if you've read it, you guys know, I give you a prime example of a unit that I sold in the downtown East Side to a client and how exactly those numbers work for him. Now I can tell you he's up now on this property, bought it 8 or 9 years ago, up a couple $100,000, still owns it, still got a good solid tenant in there. That's how wealth is created. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, see you next week.